Daniel's eyes snapped open, heart racing. 9:17 a.m. The digital clock blinked. He took a shaky breath, skin clammy with cold sweat. It was Friday the 13th. Again, the recurring nightmare always started the same way. Counting repetitions. An ominous black cat, shattered mirrors and spilled salt. Glimmers of dread that built to a crushing surreal terror. While the horrific dream felt so real in the moment, the details quickly faded upon waking, leaving behind only a residual unease that clung to him like a shadow. He grabbed the aquamarine worry stone from his nightstand, focusing on the cool, smooth surface as he stroked his thumb across it in a careful pattern. 7 strokes on the top, flip, 7 strokes on the bottom. Over and over until his breathing steadied and rational thoughts seeped back in. It was just a dream like always, but that didn't make facing the day, especially this ill-omened day, any easier. With a heavy sigh, Daniel extracted himself from the tangled sheets and trudged to the bathroom to start his morning routine. Wash face with hand soap, lather for a count of 13, rinse for a count of 13, pat dry with a hand towel, folded in thirds, for a count of 13. Brush teeth for 2 minutes and 13 seconds. Comb hair with 40 strokes on the left, 40 on the right. Every action had a number, a pattern, a precise ritual he had to complete just right or else. Or else what? He wasn't sure. But breaking the routines filled him with a riveting anxiety, like tempting fate. Rationally, he knew the counting and repetitions didn't actually prevent bad things from happening. But another part of him, the part that put stock in superstitions and signs, just couldn't risk it, especially on an ill-fated day like today. He had always been a bit particular, even as a child. But it wasn't until his mother passed away 7 years ago that his quirks spiraled into full-blown obsessive-compulsive disorder. In his grief, the rituals became a way to impose a sense of control on an uncertain world, a futile attempt to keep any more bad things at bay. Now at 28, he could scarcely remember a time when numbers didn't rule his life, when every action wasn't dictated by a self-imposed algorithm of obsessive routines and superstitious avoidance. 3 taps before opening a door, 7 circles stirring his coffee, 13 steps between streetlights on his walk to work, never stepping on sidewalk cracks, always carrying his worry stone, a rotating collection of gems and minerals that supposedly warded off various misfortunes. Daniel hated it, hated how much of his mind and his life OCD consumed. How could he ever hold down a normal job or relationship when he was a slave to his own destructive thoughts? He had tried to resist the compulsions before, had sought therapy and medication. But inevitably, the intrusive thoughts would worm their way back in. The anxiety would ratchet up to an unbearable degree, and he would shamefully succumb to the illogical rituals once more. Buttoning up his work shirt, aligning the buttons on the placket just right, Daniel tried to steel himself for the day ahead. He worked as a stocker at a local department store, one of the few jobs he'd managed to keep for any length of time. It was menial work, but it kept him busy and allowed him a certain amount of solitude. His co-workers had learned not to comment on his quirks, writing him off as that oddball loner who was finicky about how he arranged the merchandise. The morning passed in a blur of counting and straightening, items stocked in odd numbers, labels facing out at precise angles, circular routes walked through the aisles, always passing the central point an odd number of times. By the time his lunch break rolled around at 11:33, Daniel was exhausted by the mental gymnastics. He always spent his 33-minute lunch break the same way, walking the 7 blocks to a corner diner and ordering the exact same meal: a roast beef and Swiss patty melt on rye, meat cooked to 162 degrees Fahrenheit, cheese melted at 162 degrees Fahrenheit, bread caramelized just so, with French fries fried at 363 degrees Fahrenheit for 2.5 minutes, tossed twice, then fried a minute more, never touching the sandwich. He ate it in a precise pattern: 2 fries, 1 corner of sandwich, for fries, next corner, repeat, washing it down with iced tea mixed with 2 sugars and 1 artificial sweetener, stirred 4 times right, 2.5 times left. Any deviation from this ritual felt like inviting catastrophe. The diner staff knew him well by now. Some regarded him with pity, others found his eccentricities exasperating. But he was a reliable customer and a generous tipper, always leaving $5.51 on a $9.49 bill. So they accommodated his particularities without much comment. Except today, the pity in their eyes felt magnified, their glances a little too long, whispers a little too pointed. Did he look as frayed as he felt? Was his composure slipping, inner torment bleeding through? He gripped the worry stone tighter in his pocket, stroking and flipping, as if it could deflect their attention. Practically gulping down the last bites and tossing the money on the counter, Daniel made a hasty retreat. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to pull into his lungs. He needed to get back to the safety of solitude and the comforting mindlessness of work. But the reprieve was short-lived. Back at the store, it seemed like the whole universe was conspiring to thwart his fragile equilibrium. Displays he had meticulously arranged were in disarray, items out of order, stock numbers all wrong. Had there been an earthquake? A poltergeist? More likely, it was the result of careless customers and inattentive co-workers. But to Daniel's fractured psyche, it felt personal, targeted, like a sign that his bad luck was escalating. He scrambled to set it right, to restore the precarious balance. But it was a losing battle, a Sisyphean effort doomed to fall short. There simply wasn't enough time to fix it all before the store closed. He would have to leave it imperfect, undone. The thought filled him with a crushing despair. As he clocked out at 5:07 p.m., 7 minutes past the hour as always, Daniel could feel himself unraveling. The missed routines, the shortcuts he'd been forced to take, weighed on him like a physical burden. He felt contaminated, cursed, like he was wearing a bullseye for all the world's misfortunes. The worry stone was clenched in his fist, practically ablaze with all the heat and sweat of his manic energy. It seemed to mock him now, proclaiming itself useless, powerless in the face of his cataclysmic luck. He nearly hurled it into the street, but the fear of losing his talisman was even greater than his disillusionment in it. He stopped at the corner to collect himself, quaking hands fumbling in a vain attempt to light a cigarette. He didn't even smoke really, except in times of extreme agitation. It was a disgusting habit, but there was something about the ritual of it, the counting of drags and flicks of ash, that appeased his battered mind. As he struggled with the lighter, a black cat suddenly streaked across his path. The 13th of the day if he was keeping count, which of course he was, he always was. It figured, he thought bitterly, that this harbinger of doom would make a final appearance to cap off a monumentally awful day. He shuddered, a frisson of fear chasing up his spine. 13 black cats, a full-fledged omen, one he couldn't ignore or explain away. Felt like a warning, a predecessor of something truly terrible. What that terrible thing could be, Daniel had no idea. His life was already in shambles, his mind a prison. What tragedy could possibly outstrip the hell he endured every day in his own dysfunctional head? Not for the first time, a dark thought slithered through his mind, an urge for release, for it all to just end, to finally be free of his tormenting mind by the utter annihilation of self. A siren screamed by, startling him out of his morose reverie. The lit cigarette tumbled from his fingers, leaving a trail of spent ashes. No. He wouldn't go there, to that ultimate unthinkable act. He was exhausted and despondent, but he didn't truly want to die. He just wanted to be free. Free of the constant counting that made his eyes twitch. Free of the bleak, depressive thoughts that filled him with despair. Free of the suffocating routines he felt compelled to plan his life around. What he wanted was a chance to just be normal. With a last deep, shuddering breath, Daniel discarded the spent cigarette and resumed his weary trudge home. One foot in front of the other, counting steps and cracks. He was too drained to care about the bad luck he was courting with each misstep. Back in his dingy studio apartment, he collapsed on the bed, not even bothering to remove his shoes. Exhaustion pulled him under into a dreamless sleep, a temporary reprieve from the waking nightmare of his existence. He awoke with a start, disoriented and sweat-soaked, to the blaring of his alarm. 9:17 a.m. With a groan, he rolled over and silenced it, noticing as he did that it was Saturday. He had the day off. He nearly wept with relief. After the hellish ordeal of yesterday, a day free of obligations sounded like heaven. He could stay in his apartment, maybe even in this bed, and not have to face the world and all its triggers. But as he lay there, contemplating his empty stretch of solitude, a new thought entered his mind. What if he didn't stay in, didn't while away the hours on pointless rituals, didn't succumb to the pull of his obsessions? What if, just for today, he tried to live normally? The idea was terrifying. So much could go wrong if he skipped his routines, ignored his urges. It went against everything his disordered mind screamed at him. But another part of him, an ember of yearning buried beneath the ash of his dysfunction, just wanted to know what it would feel like to live untethered by his self-imposed chains. Even if just for a day, maybe he could do it. A day of exposure to his biggest fears. Prove to himself they held no real power over him. Build a base to keep fighting his OCD. Before he could second-guess himself, Daniel pushed off the bed with a grunt. He had no real plan, just a nebulous idea to do the opposite of his instincts. He started with a shower, something he normally avoided as much as possible because the cascade of water and slippery surfaces triggered all sorts of invasive thoughts. Today, he ignored the numbers that wanted to dictate his scrubbing and rinsing. He just washed until he felt clean. Getting dressed was another challenge. Daniel typically spent an inordinate amount of time arranging his clothes just right, tapping the hangers, checking alignment. Today, he grabbed the first half-clean things he found and put them on without fuss. The lack of order chafed at him, but he grit his teeth and pushed through. Pulling on his sneakers, he nearly forgot to grab his worry stone. His hand hovered over the dish where they sat, fingers twitching. Rub top 7 times, flip, rub bottom 7 times. The urge was strong. With a concerted effort, he retracted his hand and stuffed it in his pocket. No crutch today. Out on the street, Daniel was assaulted by stimuli that made his obsessions flare. Cracks in the sidewalk, litter blowing about, sirens in the distance. Each one felt like a test, a potential target for his all-consuming need to count, avoid, or control. Walking without counting steps was a monumental challenge. It felt wrong, off-kilter, like the earth might yawn open and swallow him whole any second. But he resisted, pushing his mind to focus outward instead of zeroing in on every little detail. He wandered into a park, meandering the paths without keeping track of his lefts and rights. Children's laughter assaulted his ears, their joyful shrieks and uncontrolled movements an assault to his sense of order. His palms itched with the need to organize their chaos. But he found a bench and sat, deliberately wasting time watching their unfettered play. As he let go of the need to control, something loosened in Daniel's chest. A knot unspooled, one he hadn't even realized he had been holding on to. For a moment, he didn't feel like an anxious prisoner in his own mind. He was just a man, sitting in a park, soaking up a sunny day. The hours unspooled, one blending into the next. He wandered where his feet took him, letting impulse and curiosity be his guide instead of routine and ritual. He got lunch from a food truck, not even bothering to check the temperature of his food or cut it into a prescribed number of bites. He browsed a used bookstore, running his fingers over the spines without counting, letting titles catch his eye at random. He sat and people watched, not judging their differences but appreciating the variety of lives and experiences. It wasn't a cure. The urges still plagued him, spiking his anxiety and whispering doom in his ear. He doubted he would ever be truly free of his OCD. But for one day, he had tricked it into loosening its grip, had pried its fingers back enough to slip free for a few blissful hours and remember what living could feel like. As evening fell, Daniel turned his feet back toward home, a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration buzzing through him. He had made it through one day without giving in to his obsessions. He hadn't completed a single ritual, and the world hadn't ended. He was still standing, still breathing. He knew the reprieve would likely be short-lived. Tomorrow, the patterns of thought would crash back in, the routines would beckon. But he would have this day to hold onto, to remind him that another way was possible. That his OCD didn't have to rule his life completely. He could keep fighting, keep trying to break free. Back in his apartment, Daniel kicked off his shoes and let them lay where they fell. This was his life, a mix of good days and bad, victories and setbacks. He was more than his obsessions, more than his rituals. Tomorrow, he would call his therapist back, maybe explore medication options again. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be instant, but he had seen a glimpse of possibility, and he wasn't ready to give that up. Where life wasn't perfect, but perfectly messy and unpredictable.